It's an old familiar story. Maybe too familiar. Sometimes when we talk about baptism, we think about how sweet it is with especially young children and how cute. And there's a warmness about it. We think about being in the family of God, and there's a security about it. Our thoughts say we know this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry, so there's something important here. But in fact, this is scandalous. And it's powerful. And we don't usually recognize that as we read this story. It's not our culture. As you read this, it begins, John appears in the wilderness. This has all the feel of an axe murderer showing up in a horror movie. And in fact, one of the Gospels, John has an axe that he lays to the root. He appears all of a sudden out in the wilderness where no one would expect him. And Jesus came from civilization, from his little village, from respectability, from his place, out into the wilderness. The wildness, the chaos. Now, in order to understand some of the impact of this, we need to understand how important, how fundamental family and community was at that time in that place. Now, John lived in the wilderness. No one lived in the wilderness. It's a tough place to be, but John lived there. And Jesus went out and met him, what we would call a God-forsaken place. See, the wilderness was antisocial. The wilderness went people who couldn't get along with anyone else. They went to get away, to escape. Oftentimes, demons drew people out into the desert. It was wild. It was dangerous. And this is where John the Baptist is. John was every bit the wild man. He dressed like it. He ate like it. But he was wild as the prophets are wild. He was calling people back to God, people who didn't even realize they were estranged. See, that's where the real problem is. You can know that you don't have a connection with God right now. Or you can have a connection with God right now. And you can deal with both of those things. But what you can't deal with is if you don't realize that you're estranged from God to begin with. If you're living in your own little world, you can't deal with it. The wilderness was a wild place. Now, for Jesus to meet John out in the wilderness means that he had to have left his family. He had to have left his village, the place where he belonged. And I mean that in the sense of not where he felt loved and accepted, the place of belonging. But that's where he was supposed to be. That's where you belong. And he left all that. He left his identity, his place, his respectability, his family, his village. The fanfare for this event was in a minor key. Now, to add to that, there's a great power there. As Jesus came up out of the water, what does it say happened? The heavens were torn. It's a violent tearing. It's like glass shattering. That's the impact that it has. That's the kind of drama that this story has. It's not a sweet little story about being baptized. So, what does the prophet and the Savior have to say to us about what baptism means in relationship to us and the work of God? Well, the first thing I think is baptism marks the end of the past. Let me explain what I mean by that. It's kind of like, when you're playing Monopoly, you make it past Boardwalk and Park Place and you land on Go. You collect $200. Everything's in front of you. It's all new. You don't have to worry about those big rents. That's what baptism means. The past is done. It's the end of the past. And for Jesus, nothing was ever the same. He didn't go back. He didn't live in that village anymore. In fact, so much so that people would say, well, aren't you Jesus, the son of Joseph and Mary? Isn't that you? I know where you live. I know the street you live on. I know your neighbors. What are you doing here? It was different, and it confused people. Who is he? What's he doing? Remember when they brought his family to him? He said, your mom and your brothers and sisters are out front. He said, my family are those who do the will of God. Things were different. Nothing was ever the same. That's what baptism means. Nothing's ever the same. The past is done. It's done. But you know, like I know, the past keeps coming back to us. You know, subtly, it slips in there and it sucks us in. So part of what we need to see is, what is it in our past that weighs us down? What is it that comes up and brings up guilt in us? Or sorrow, or hurt, or pain, or fear? Or even an unfounded glory? We get lost in that as much. What is it that keeps coming up and trying to define us? For your GPS, you may want to deal with this. What is in your past that keeps you from sleeping? Not always, but sometimes. What is it in your past that creeps up and keeps you from sleeping? What weighs you down? What can't you let go of? That's the question. You may have an answer for that right away. You can just write that in your GPS. If not, you may want to write down the question and think about that later. Baptism marks the end of the past. Remember the story of the Lion King? Simba is away from his home, away from his family. He's lost touch with all of that. He's living a life that doesn't befit a lion, let alone a king. And meanwhile, since he is gone, the whole place is turned bad. It's dark. Nothing is going as it should. It's not there. The past is so overpowering for him. What he didn't do, what he left when he should have stayed, is so overpowering for him that he cannot go back. He can't face it. And even if he did go back, what would he do? It was out of control. You may have had those moments in your life. Well, the baboon priest, Rafiki, finds him in the jungle, and in John the Baptist style, he takes him to a pool of water and makes him look in. Simba sees his own reflection, but he also sees the reflection of his father. And as he sees his father in himself, there's a voice that speaks to him. And he's changed. He's changed. He's transformed. The past is gone. It holds no more power over him. It has only brought him to where he is now. It does not affect where he will go and who he will be. That's what baptism does for us. The past is ended. It does not affect where we will go. Way back in 2014, I think it was probably about November. Can you remember back that far? I found a song on the radio that I really liked, and I told Kara about it. And she found the CD and gave it to me for Christmas. I really appreciate that. But it has some power to it, and I want to share with you a little bit of that. It's called Hello, My Name Is. It's by Matthew West. Hello, my name is Regret. I'm pretty sure we have met. Every single day of your life, I'm the whisper inside that won't let you forget. Hello, my name is Defeat. I know you recognize me. I am no longer defined by all the wreckage behind. The one who makes all things new has proven it's true. Just take a look at my life. Hello, my name is the child of the one true God. My name is the child of the one true God. The end is past. All that was is simply all that was. Author Marianne Williamson tells about a conversation she had with a boy named Andrew. When Andrew went to high school, he'd be the first to tell you he was just a jerk. He was mean to everybody. That's who he was. But at the end of that first year of high school, his family moved away and he went to a different school, spent a couple years there. And then his family moved back to the old house, which meant he had to go back to the old school. He was not looking forward to that at all because everyone knew him as the old Andrew. He changed, he matured, he'd grown. What was he going to do now that people knew him as that old Andrew? While she was talking to him, she suggested that he simply ignore what they thought of him and be who he was. Eventually they began to get it. Baptism marks the end of the past as we live into the future. She then makes a comment that caught my attention. And we're going to put it up here for you so you can write it on your GPS. We're going to leave it up there for a minute or two so you have time. But let me read it to you. Spirituality. We are reborn in any moment. We do not take the past with us. Write that down. Reflect on that this week. We're reborn in any moment. We do not take the past with us. Now, the next thing that baptism does is it gives us a new identity, both as an individual and as members of a new community. Bill Leonard reflects on his baptism. He said, I was 8 years old when I was baptized. I was joining the First Baptist Church in Decatur, Texas. But the baptistry was unusable. And so my pastor borrowed the baptistry from Bell Baptist Church on the outskirts of town. He said it was a typical baptistry. On the back wall was painted the Jordan River. He said no matter that the trees in the painting looked more like the cottonwoods and the scrub oaks of North Texas than those of the other promised land, we got the point. The baptismal pool in that little Baptist church stretched all the way back to the Jordan River of Jesus and John. He said, I did not know the full meaning of baptism, but I knew that Jesus loved me, that the church loved me, and that forgiveness and goodness were somehow present in and through it all. We are all baptized in the same river. We are one with all of those who have been baptized. So, he said, I continue to return to the river with other children and adults as they begin their journey. We are always going there to the river, where we discover the miracle of God's grace. We are part of a new family. That's what Jesus found. That's what's there for us. During the Civil War in 1863, it was wintertime, settled over Virginia. Both sides cut way back on their warfare. In the Confederate camps, there was a chaplain, devout chaplain by the name of Willie Ragland. Willie was a fiery preacher, and while he was preaching, one of the young men named Goodwin was converted. And he got it in his head that he wanted to be baptized in the Ripon River, which was close by. Well, the Confederate officers tried to talk him out of it, because that river was the border between the two forces, the Union and Confederate armies. And so anyone who would make their way down to the river might be picked off by sharpshooters. But Goodwin would not be deterred. He wanted to be baptized into this new faith of his. And so the officers gave in. And so Willie, Goodwin, and about 50 other men put down their weapons, walked cautiously down to the river. The Union side were kind of confused about all these people coming down and getting into this icy water. So they didn't fire. Well, as they got into the water, they began to baptize him, and they began to sing songs of faith. The Union soldiers recognized the songs. Many of them laid down their weapons, went to the river's edge, and began to sing those same songs of faith. Baptism brings us into a new family. It's a family that we don't choose and we don't control. If we were to choose who was inside the kingdom of God, it would probably look much different than it is. They're baptized into a family God defines. Some of you may remember the old Andy Griffith show. Most of you, except for Kara, she's way too young. Well, you may remember in that first season, the 25th episode. Remember that one?
Yeah.
It was a classic.
Like it was yesterday.
Like it was yesterday. The Women's Historical Society had discovered that there was a descendant of a hero from the Revolutionary War who was living right there in Mayberry. It was exciting. They didn't know quite who it was because they had to go back and look at the records. And so there was excitement, there was speculation. Most of the time, we're just happy that someone in their midst was a descendant of that great hero. But you know Barney Fife, right? He pulled out his family tree and he began to bend the roots and trim branches and move things around so that his tree would go back where he wanted it to go. Well, finally, they discovered who it was. Time of great anticipation. But as it was announced, the whole town shook their heads. You know who it was? Do you remember?
I think it was Otis.
It was Otis Campbell, the town's drunk. This great honor that was going to go to Otis Campbell. What were they going to do? So the mayor, you know the mayor, he went to Andy and said, Andy, you got to do something about this. You got to go talk to him. Tell him not to come, that we'll have a stand-in for him except the flag. So Andy went to Otis's house, and for the first time in a long time, Otis's wife was proud of him. In fact, she kissed him on the head. He said, that's the first time you've ever touched my head with something so soft in years. And Andy couldn't bring himself to ask him not to go. So when the honor was ready, they gathered in the mayor's office. The Women's Society was there with their plaque, and Otis showed up. As they handed him the plaque, he said to them, just because you're a descendant of a hero doesn't make you one too. So I would like to present this plaque to the town of Mayberry, to which I am proud to belong. That's what baptism does. It brings us into a family that we might not always be comfortable with. But it gives everyone a place of belonging. The Reformation leader Zwingli out of Zurich compared baptism to a monk's cowl or a monk's robe. When young boys entered the monastery in order to become monks, they were each given a cowl or a robe. And they were one size fits all. But that one size was adult male. And so that cowl would swallow up that young boy in his boyish stature. But over time, he would grow into it until he became an adult, and it fit perfectly. He now was a monk. He looked like a monk and he lived like a monk. Baptism changes us. It gives us something to grow into. On a winter's day in Alabama, there was a young boy who was outside a bakery shop trying to warm his bare feet on a grate. A woman was passing by and she noticed, and her heart ached. He had a thin little jacket on. The wind was cool and brisk. And there that young boy was. And so she said to him, "Where are your shoes, young man?" And he had to admit he didn't have any. And she said, "Well, we need to take care of this." And so she took him by the hand, went into a department store, bought him new shoes and a heavy coat. As they came out together, he was so excited to show his family, he ran off, then he stopped. He turned around and he came back and he thanked her. He said, "Can I ask you a question?" She said, "Sure." He said, "Are you God's wife?" She smiled a bit and said, "No, I'm not God's wife, but I'm one of God's children." And he said, "I knew it! I knew you were a relation. In baptism, we are called to grow into His image of love and service. At the height of the Iranian hostage crisis, you may remember that time, a woman befriended an Iranian student. Now, in the early stages of the revolution, all the bank accounts were frozen. And so here he was in a strange country, had no money, no one liked Iranians. But he began to say, well, can I do little things for you, whatever you need? Wash your windows, trim your hedges, whatever it is. And so she, out of compassion, took him into her home. He lived there, he ate meals with them. But not everyone was happy with that. Her neighbors were incensed. During this time, she would have an Iranian person in her house, in their neighborhood. Her pastor talked to her about it and said, well, why was it that you befriended this young Iranian? She pounded her fist on the desk and said, because I'm a Christian, darn it, you think it's easy? That's part of what baptism is. It's not easy. The image of baptism is dying to yourself. It's dying in service to others. Sarah Jo Sarchett is a Presbyterian minister in Chicago. Now, for the purpose of this story, she's going to become Methodist. Now, she doesn't know me, I don't know her, we're never going to meet, so it's okay, I can do this, I can get away with it. Now, what you need to know is that in the Presbyterian Church, they have a Presbyterian Book of Order. It's all the rules of their church. For us as Methodists, it's called the Book of Discipline. So, for our purposes here today, Sarah Jo is a Methodist and has a Book of Discipline on the top shelf, her bookshelf. So, Sarah, who lives in Chicago, we can keep her in Chicago, that's okay. In fact, it's probably better off that she's in Chicago. A 10-year-old in her congregation named Cameron walked into her office one day and said, I need to talk to you. Now, he'd just gotten off the soccer field and he had his little baseball cap from the Cincinnati Reds. He said to her, I'd like to be baptized. 10-year-old. He said, last week we were studying Jesus' baptism in Sunday school. My teacher asked who was baptized, and everyone was except for me. I want to be baptized. Using her best pastoral care voice, she said, Cameron, do you really want to be baptized just because everyone else is? He lifted up her and smiled and said, no, I want to be baptized because it means I belong to God. 10-year-old gets it. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty impressive. So she was so touched, and she said to him, well then, how about this Sunday? The smile turned to a bit of concern. He said, do I have to be baptized in front of all those people in church? Can't I just have a friend baptize me out in the river? He said, where in the world did you get that idea? He said, well, Jesus was baptized by his cousin, wasn't he? She had to admit, he had a point. Then she said, though, but if you do that, how will the church know you're baptized? And she sensed this was a teachable moment. So she got on her little footstool and she reached up for a Book of Discipline. But before she could grab onto the book, he said, I guess they'll know by my new way of living. She almost fell off the stool, and she left the book right where it was. To be baptized calls us to a new way of living. It's not about rules. It's about love. It's about dying to ourselves and serving others. It's about leaving our past behind and going without fear where God wants us to be. May God help us to see what the past is doing to us, and then to begin to set it aside and move in new directions, swimming in the flow